Once again, I have Andrew Kishino as a returning guest. And for those of you who have not seen our original chat, you should. But we'll get caught up today. Andrew Kishino, a fellow voice acting colleague and also rapper. I don't know if that gets mentioned enough.
First of all, thank you. And
Yeah.
it's always great to see you, Chris.
Always
We
great to
go
see
way,
you.
way back.
Yeah.
Like fat crayons of car seats. We good. Like we go back. We're good friends.
Yeah.
And yes, thank you. That is something that actually was my occupation prior to and predates getting into voiceover. So yeah.
Right. And I think you told me you were the first Canadian rapper with a major label contract, correct? Deal?
I was the first Canadian MC signed to a major label, A&M, in 1990.
And I remember you told me your royalty check that came, I don't know how many years later, was.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Which is strange because nobody ever on any music, anytime I ever talk about this with music people, they never ask this. But I got a check for, it was like $190, 10 years after the release date of that record.
Oh man. And
so 19 bucks a year. What you're
19 bucks a year, but not even really adjusted for inflation. It's just 19 bucks a year. The first year 19, the last year 19.
You know. And 19 Canadian dollars.
Yeah.
So we got to take a ding on that too. So
right. So whenever you're an American who lives, say, near the Great Lakes, and you drive over the border and you go to a pub in Canada and you ask them for a Labatt's, for a blue, as they call it, a Labatt's blue. That's the beer. There, you don't say Labatt's blue. You just say, I'll have a blue. And they'll tell you, okay, it's $3 US or, $3.50 Canadian, whatever. They'll do that little exchange for you right then and there. Right. And so
yeah, it's the calculation is very quick, and you also have to be as astute because sometimes they'll say that and you'll be like, hold on, I'm getting taken. Or what they'll do is they say, I don't know, to make it easy we take it at par. And then you get really scrubbed.
Yeah. And then, so as a label, they probably didn't bother to tell you, do you want to be paid in Canadian dollars or in American dollars? And you're thinking, it's not going to matter, is it?
Yeah. No, at this point, if I were to take the check through a drive-through, I'd still be bumming change to get the remainder of the combo. So yeah, it doesn't really matter.
And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, and also just to get caught up. But frankly, this conversation is going to be shorter because I have to leave for something later. It's going to be shorter.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
But this conversation's regrettably going to be shorter than the phone call that we did to hook this up, where we talked for almost 2 hours.
And I think that was because we just initially hadn't spoken in so long. And we were just catching up on regular stuff.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. But one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you is because you've always been pretty much on the at the forefront of what is breaking when it pertains to technology and the performing arts and what we do. Because I remember being on a little makeshift committee to talk to SAG about how to process residual checks faster. And you had some.
Oh, I remember. You remember that
meeting?
That's right.
And I remember thinking, wow, he's got some really interesting ideas, and a lot of that had to do with the I don't even know what you call them anymore, but these little scan codes that you will get on your phone.
Oh, the implementation of QR codes.
Yeah. The was it QBR?
QR codes.
QR codes. Yeah, the QR codes. And I thought, all right, so he's looking at this in as contemporary a way as possible, because this is actually the big reason why I wanted to talk is what artists are always having to do is not just express their art. That's a separate craft, but they also have to know how to be business people, and they also have to understand technology. And the way those things are changing, and one of them will inform the other. And I'm noticing that how we express our art is changing in relation to how technology has changed the game. And I just want to know what your thoughts are on the state of the union. How have you seen it change over the years? Even since when we talked to SAG, how have you seen it change? It's a big open-ended question, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm sort of thinking where to begin. I'm inclined to begin at a place that you and I have spent a lot of time sitting and waiting to go in and do things, which is a place in Burbank called Voicecaster.
Yeah.
And Voicecaster, for those of you who are not familiar with the place, who have never set foot in the lobby,
Right.
I don't know if they still have them there, but there used to be on the wall rows upon rows upon rows of 1/4-inch tapes.
Yeah.
In these boxes that were about this, probably about what, like 5-6 inches square, something like
Yeah,
that.
it
About
looks
that.
like almost like a makeup compact case, if you were to
Yeah.
look at it. It is, I mean, they're there as part of the decor, but also as a reminder, several reminders that these were people that were at the top of the game in the 70s and 80s, and this was the technology we used back then, and this was all relevant at the time. And it lets you know that the clock is always ticking and things are always changing.
Yeah, it was exactly. I always took it as equal parts nostalgia and equal parts reminder.
Yeah.
To look at it and to say, wow, these are people to whom I obviously should accord an appropriate level of respect.
Yeah.
But at the same time, people of looking at it and saying, this is an outdated technology that will not fly right.
Right.
And if I'm not on top of that, if I'm not educating myself constantly and familiarizing myself with it, then I'm going to fall behind.
Right.
One of the things sort of forced a quantum jump, and that obviously was the pandemic, because, and it's been discussed many times in many different ways, is that people needed to almost immediately reevaluate exactly what their capabilities were recording from home. And some of those capabilities required an extraordinary level of technical acumen to put things together.
Right.
So you suddenly, and on top of that, you had to kind of be like a drummer, where you had to watch your game, monitor your the video feed coming in, monitor your level going to the backup recording, and your level going to whatever remote transmission protocol was. Familiarize yourself with those protocols. Familiarize yourself with all the video protocols, which had not sorted themselves out yet, because people were using WebEx, Zoom, Skype, Microsoft Teams, Blue Jeans, and people still hadn't, settled on a good one. You had to familiarize yourself with and most people still don't get this, is the differentiation between sample rate and bit depth, and what that meant for certain, recordings, what broadcast quality actually meant,
Right.
vis-a-vis what a client on the far end would be willing to be able to place in an ad and say, this can go to air or web, and
Right.
not having it sound like hot stir-fried garbage.
Right.
There were a million different things with specificity that had to happen, but the overall thing relative to what you're saying was, it was incumbent upon us to take that mantle and to, whether we liked it or not, familiarize ourselves with that at a high rate of speed.
Yeah, we had to become engineers.
So, yes, and I'm gonna hold this because there's okay, because I don't want to. There are people who've made a career on social media of saying, like, I engineer my own stuff. In very concise terms, I'll be very blunt. We are gain monitors. We are not engineers.
Right.
I will be very, very clear about that.
Yeah.
And the differentiation I will say is, if you're an engineer, then the actual engineering means is great. Then I'm gonna sit you in front of a 64-channel automated Neve console with motorized faders, pull up this 128-channel mix, and expect you to do subgroupings, bust it all out, stem it out, and send it to the client.
Right. Right. So,
and if you can't do that,
yeah,
then what you're really doing is you're saying, I watch the volume. Yes, technically we engineer, we watch our volume, which is engineering.
Point taken.
Let us not disrespect the men and women in the craft of engineering and mixing in what that means. Because people got a little too comfortable in saying that.
Well, that's true. And what our job became, and it never was our job before, but what our job became was making sure that we captured a pristine file that had not been messed with, so that you could
Right.
send that pristine file to the actual engineer and they could take and say, all right, now I'm going to do what I do. But what people weren't doing well is capturing a pristine file because either their equipment wasn't up to par or their environment was not up to par. And it's a lot easier to get that right than people thought. But to your point, you mentioned bit rate and sample size. And can you break down what that really means? Because there are going to be some voice actors who still don't yet know what that means. I only know where to set those things. I still couldn't really describe them.
Okay, well, it used to be that people would say the bit rate and sample depth were correlate to frequency and amplitude when it went to analog tape. Frequency being the pitch of the sound, like
Right.
how low or how high it was,
Yeah.
bass treble. Amplitude being how quiet or how soft it is.
Gotcha.
That's not exactly true.
Mhm.
Bit rate refers to, I always like to think of it as, imagine if you had an SLR camera, right? And that camera could take 44,100 pictures per second, or 48,000 pictures per second, or 96,000 pictures per second. That is what sample rate is correlate to, where when the sample rate is set at, let's say 48, which is kind of the standard for non-interactive stuff like commercial or animation or what have you, is the computer is taking 48,000 pictures of that sound in that moment.
Right.
Every second, it's taking 48,000 pictures of that sound. Obviously, with a higher resolution, you're going to get, or a higher sample rate, you're going to get a arguably better resolution of the sound.
Right.
Bit depth refers to the potential of the dynamic range of the sound. So 16 was the standard for a long time. 44.116 was the standard for CDs. 24 is what we generally have now. Now we have people who go at 32 sometimes, but unless you got a computer with a lot of grunt and a significant amount of CPU power, sometimes it's a choking point for a lot of stuff. But that refers to the potential dynamic capacity, in the shortest way I can sort of describe it, of what a sound could be, of what a sound can go in amplitude in that respect.
Gotcha. And so to let people know how I'm operating, and I'm sure you can do the same. I've got my customized professional booth, so my environment is captured. My environment is handled. The acoustics are there. And when I say acoustics, meaning there's no bounce. Every file I send, because I'm not sending singing files where you want some of that reverb and bounce. I'm sending voice acting files where you just want the voice and nothing around it. You want it suspended in midair with nothing but quiet. And when I send that, I'm sending an audio file off of Audacity, which is a free to use open source software. And I send it on 2448. When I send an audition file, I'm just sending a 16 and it's an MP3. And that's all I send. But when I send a recording, when I'm recording from home, I send it to The Simpsons, I send it to Apex Legends, I send them a WAV file, and I send them 2448. And the quickest way to make an engineer and a director happy is to say, I'm going to send you a WAV file at 2448. They'll instantly know, and they'll be happy because they'll be able to give them, here's the package, take it and do what you do. So that's how I'm operating. And that's how I've done it for that couple of years now, the pandemic, doing it all from home. Are your numbers different? Are you sending off different kinds of files, or are you doing anything different to yours?
The vast majority of stuff, what you described, is essentially what it is, unless obviously by request, if somebody says they want 4816 or some kind of mix thereof. Right. Generally speaking, unless it's interactive and there's something. Even when I did Halo Infinite, it was 96. It was all 9632.
Gotcha.
And then you had to. I was like, thank goodness I got the computer cranking and I got enough grunt in this bad boy to make it happen, because you're just running Pro Tools and Source Connect and so on and so forth. That and Source Connect now, by the way, which is, I still am marvel at the reason why standard does not only goes to 4824, but that's a whole other discussion. one of the things, there's two things that you brought up that I did want to touch on that were
Sure.
critically important.
Yeah.
Is the phenomenon of you saying the voice, the voice sounding as though it is suspended in midair, as though there is no sense of dimension or space around you. That is absolutely critical. And that can be achieved through, like you said, doesn't have to be expensive, but it can be achieved with relative competency through fairly inexpensive material. The second thing that it will be something that I will die on this hill and relentlessly kind of pull the megaphone out on, is never, ever apply effects to anything that you send out.
Yeah.
No compression, no normalization, no anything. The three most important things in getting a recording right are mic technique, level setting, and environment. That's it. And I've gone to war with a ton of people who said, no, you have to do this, or I bump up the EQ at 200 to make my voice sound thicker. And I was like, there's two things wrong with that. And I always say this, the Home Depot analogy and the Hollywood Bowl analogy. The Home Depot analogy is, when you go to Home Depot and you want to build something, and you say, give me 10 sheets of 4x8 plywood and 50 2x4s. And the guy brings it back and says, well, I thought you would need 8 sheets of 6x5 plywood, so I cut it down, and I gave you 30 2x4s, but I cut them to a non-standard size because that's how I like to do it. You're like, no, I want the raw materials because I'm going to build something. And the minute you cut it, I can't uncut it. Right. So we have to think of that in terms of, we are the people in Home Depot giving the raw materials to the engineer who is building out a spot that will have music, other voices, SOTs, sound effects, and all those things have to mix. And if you don't give a pristine audio file, that person now has to make something that you put a stamp on, live in a space with all this other stuff, and it may not fit. So they may have to start pulling things out and trying to EQ out things that you've done, or to push things, or to artificially return things to a state that you had in its where if they had the original file with no processing on it, that's what they would want. Right. Now, so that's one. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, when you're talking about this, would you say this applies to auditions as well? Because the one thing I had to start doing, I was normalizing auditions because if I was doing a soft-spoken character, I didn't want to raise the gain too much because I was worried it might distort a little bit. And I thought, all right, let me boost the volume of the file when I send it off, because the engineer at the agency was saying, we're not hearing your audio as well. I thought, all right, normalizing seems to be a quick way to boost that. Now, I've never normalized an actual recording for a job because I knew that it doesn't matter how low it is. Right. They'll tell me to boost the gain in the session and all that. Right. But for some auditions, I've been boosting the audio just because if I'm worried about raising the gain too much on the mic, so to make it too sensitive.
That is sort of a tricky area, because normalizing is again, in short, it's the computer looking at the entire audio file, finding out what the absolute peak is, and then raising the level relative to the absolute loudest peak. Right. So technically speaking, it's not a bad thing, because what it really is doing is just turning the volume up, which isn't technically processing. Right. You're really just turning, which isn't such a bad deal. Problem is a lot of people will compress things and then normalize them, but then they get into raising the noise floor, and you also end up shredding the transients. So there's a whole bunch of things, yada, 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 ad infinitum. Normalizing in and of itself is not I say this with great caution, but not a bad thing. There's also a problem where, again, a lot of things we also have to consider, which is many people will say all these kind of crazy ass things, and then they listen back on computer speakers. So the thing is, you can't, for all the work in the $1,000 mics we got, it's like it's listening back on quite possibly the lousiest playback device in existence. Right. So no one's hearing run, yada, yada. The second thing is, from a psychoacoustic standpoint, is people always perceive louder as better. It can be worse, but if it's louder, it hits, the impact is felt more.
Yeah.
So arguably that's not a bad thing. I would just be very careful about, and for auditions, yeah, that's cool. I'd just be super careful about if it was raising the noise floor a ton or compressing things so it got like absurdly loud because you were taming peaks and doing stuff like that. That's, longer discussion, but that's the short answer.
Of course, yeah. And I think what a lot of voice actors are having to do is learn this technical stuff on the fly, because for so many of us, I remember talking to award-winning voice actors who had been sending in auditions on their phones because their names were so known. They didn't have to have any technical competency. They just needed to give a read. Their name preceded them. And then as soon as the pandemic hit, they were scrambling to catch up and say, I don't even know what Source Connect is. I don't even know what a lot of this stuff even is. And they had to get caught up. And a lot of it, they don't have to worry about as much anymore because they've either had somebody come over and do their setup for them, or they've gone back into the studios because the protocols are in place now where you can do it a lot more easily.
Yes. That, oh man, you're asking great questions because so many of these are things that require a huge amount of unpacking.
Yeah.
A few things have grated my cheese more than when people will say, you see it on social media, it's like, oh, I just read this on my phone. And I'm like, yeah, I could fall down the stairs too. Like, it's kind of like if you said, oh, I made this piece of music, and someone said, oh yeah, I play guitar after I get off work too. Like, stop it. I hate to be so reductive about it, but stop being stupid. Like, because it is kind of a dumb thing to be like, it's kind of an ignorant thing to say like, oh, I just recorded it, because to your point, and again, whole other discussion,
right,
is that some people's names, and in instances, I'll just actually, you know what? I won't even get into trouble. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
Some people's names are such that all they have to do is have the name on the file, and they're like, oh, I know that they're going to be able to bring it.
Yeah.
We could go back and forth about what the benefit or, detriment is on that. But yes, I can record something on my phone.
Yeah.
I can also make the lasagna out of half-assed ingredients, but will it be the same?
Right.
And the answer is, of course, no. And how do you know this? Because the quantifiable aspects, like the phone or the ingredients, are immediately met with the visceral determination factors, which are the ear and the taste.
Yeah.
So I don't take but one bite, and I know right away, I'm like, this ain't it.
Right.
If you hear something, you go, I can't describe what it is. It just doesn't sound right.
Right.
And that's kind of one of the things where it certainly did force a lot of people to get up on their game in a good way. To your point, in a good way.
Yes, and this circles back to the original point we made, which is we would sit in the Voicecaster, which, by the way, I've not been to in years because I imagine they still have a brick and mortar building, but there's not the same need to have actors show up on site for an audition. It's simply something that can be just expediently done through everyone's home setup. But at the Voicecaster, we would always take a minute and look at these 70s and early 80s demo reels. And I instantly knew what they meant by having it in that kind of package. I knew, okay, that's on tape. That's on tape, which, if you know, all right, don't ever put that near a magnet. And people hear that now and they think, I don't know what any of this means. It's like, well, first of all, you can't store tape near a magnet. It will erase what's on the tape. And what do you mean by tape? Well, you take this bit of, I don't know, ukulele picks or whatever you want to call them. I don't even know what tape is technically made of. It's extremely flammable, but you run it through a machine and it's going to go around a little metal winder and it's going to play. It's going to run across something that will play it. It will take the encoding that's on there, turn it into audio or film, if it's a film reel. And when I was in college in 1990, my junior year at University of Georgia, I was in the journalism school. They said, we're going to show you how you edit. And we learned how to edit reel to reel, splicing reels together, which means we needed to buy a razor blade, a grease pencil, and actual Scotch tape. And you would set up a reel of tape, run it together, pick out the place where you wanted to cut something out, take a razor blade, actually cut it, and then cut another part of it. Now you have the actual part that you didn't want. So all this stuff you guys are looking at digitally, we were holding in our hand the actual audio. Throw that away, take the tape it together, and then label it with a grease pencil on the outside of it. This is the actual latest tape of it, and then you would play it. And that's what we learned on. And I thought, why am I learning this? There's absolutely no way this is still relevant technology. And I think they wanted us to just actually get our hands dirty and feel what it was like to do that. And to understand, conceptually speaking, what you're doing when you're doing this with a machine and a digital readout. This is physically the same thing.
It absolutely is. And here's the thing. I'm a huge fan of practical application stuff where you get your hands on stuff. Because few things will teach you faster than, splicing tape. Yeah. Or if you're working with electrical stuff, if you eat 120 volts, you're like, okay, that hurt. Now I got to know how to do that.
Not going to do that again.
Yeah. The funny thing that you were saying about that is, even now, as you were saying it, it was like, there are so many things that are correlate to that process that translate so beautifully.
Right.
The splicing and the cutting, when we're looking at Pro Tools or Twisted Wave or Audacity or SoundForge or any of the DAWs, digital audio workstations, Ableton, Cubase, Logic, Digital Performer, any of them, when you see the red line and the waveform moving, that is tape moving across the playback head.
Right. Yeah.
When you would make splices, if you remember, there was that probably about 4 to 6 inch metal piece that had a curved kind of a bay in it, but it had a line like this, a line like this, and then a line like this, which all represented fades.
Right.
So when you crossed it diagonally, you got a fade out of the sound and the fade in of the next one.
Yeah, and this is how you could cut with the blade too. It's like this one groove. It's like that's where you're going to make your cut.
Right, and it laid the tape in.
Yeah.
But the visual representation of the actual waveform as it moves is a beautiful reminder to that thing of, the plastic film with the iron oxide substance that gets rearranged as the magnetic head moves over it. That whole beautiful magical process of what happens.
Yeah.
That is the same thing. So all we're seeing in a different sense is, and I was laughing too because you said, you can't put tape near magnets. It's like, I always say, it's like, boys, girls, don't put magnets near hard drives either. So we have not escaped any of that.
Yeah.
Like, we're still in that realm.
Yeah. And I remember as well, they taught us, okay, here's what radio station DJing is about. Okay. And we would take vinyl albums and we would have a vinyl turntable here. And as a rapper, if there's anything that it's what it's like to be around a turntable, right? And just there's a whole different way that you're even just situating your body around it. There's where you're going to put your elbows because you have to be ready to work. And I was never any good at this. But you would have 2 turntables. And one is a vinyl album, the other is a vinyl album. And you're listening to the radio and the DJ is playing it. And these guys were absolute surgeons in how they could do it. And you weren't even playing a 45. You would take the album, you would find the groove on the album as to where the song was, and you had it queued up. And then you had another one fading out. And as that one is fading out, you're fading in the new one. And you're doing it with exquisite timing while you're talking over all of this. And then, you have to do an insert. You have to do a 10-second bumper, a 10-second promo for the next thing that's coming out. And this was a cassette that you would jam into a player, and you've recorded the promo. And then when you're done playing it, you would demagnetize it. And so what you would do is you would take it on this magnetic sheet, and you would simply just sit there and rub it on there. And what's that doing? It's erasing it so you can record over it. And all of this is stuff that people do with a few clicks of a button, but to your point, getting your hands dirty and actually moving these pieces of technology fit in physical space, achieving the same thing, gives you a different appreciation of how it all happens.
I think to bring it full circle to that exact point is the thing that it concretized, but at the same time presented an immovable obstacle for people when the pandemic hit,
Yeah.
because people have become, to pull another point in, is the advancement of technologies has done an extraordinary amount for our ability to provide deliverables.
Right.
What it has negatively done is impact the rate of expectation for those deliverables.
Right.
So a lot of people were, don't understand technology at all, but expect everything to work seamlessly, constantly.
Right.
So the minute this hit, what you had was the interfacing of the very practical physical world, literally interfacing with the digital world. And people were like, wait, how am I supposed to build a space to record this stuff to get into a computer while doing, like, that's physical stuff interfacing with, I don't know how to do that. That's
right.
Because everything is like, I can do everything on my phone. I can order food. I can order an Uber. I can, do whatever I want, book a hotel room, book a vacation. Now I'm being forced to basically plug items into the computer and make everything speak to each other, and do so in a way where it becomes invisible.
Yeah.
Where all people are focused on is the performance and the communication with the director, as if all the technology makes the distance seamless.
Mm-hmm.
That was the thing that stymied a lot of people. That was the thing that completely was a stumbling block that completely threw a lot of people in, because you saw people get, the first reaction was usually people get angry about it.
Yeah.
They have this sort of viscerally emotional reaction to things not working a certain way. So it was, I mean, it's tough, because a lot of people, they still don't understand it, and they still want it to just, like, why can't it just work perfectly?
Right.
And it's,
there's a process that happens that we don't see. We don't, I mean, if you're lucky enough, you do get to see it, that all of these things that make it to your desktop or that make it to your table have been physically brought into being by people that just grind it out, that do this everyday work, and you don't always see it. And yes, the one thing the pandemic did do is introduce you to what that work is, and hopefully provide a new appreciation for the people that are skilled at it. And they allow you to go back to what you were doing, which was concentrating on your art. And the reason why I brought up what it was like 30 years ago is because I heard Neil deGrasse Tyson tell Sam Harris this on his podcast. Every 30 years, technology tends to change so much that if we go back to 30 years ago, we're not able to conceive of the things we have today. And so 30 years ago, when I was busy, this would have been 32 years ago at this point, almost 33, as I was busy demagnetizing these cassettes and cutting and splicing reel-to-reel tape, I would not have been able to conceive of the idea of sending auditions from a home booth at a certain bit rate, sample, all of that. I wouldn't have been able to conceive of that. And yet, in one generation, that's where we are, which means that whatever it is we're dealing with right now, people are probably best served not to ignore it. Keep an eye on how things change and understand how they're changing, so that eventually when it lands on you, you'll be able to get up to speed a lot more quickly.
Absolutely. It's I understand the romance of being a Luddite. Like, I understand sort of like, I work on a Remington typewriter. Like, I get all that.
Yeah.
And I think also there's something to be said for it. I mean, one of my hobbies is I bake a lot of stuff. Like, I bake bread, because there's something soothing to me about the process of that, and something also kind of oddly magical about bringing these things together, that, these disparate ingredients to turn into something.
Oh yeah, it's alchemy.
Yeah, it's alchemy. It is absolutely alchemy. It's
Yeah.
alchemical. Absolutely. But one of the things that that specific thing does for me is that it also teaches me the precision and the patience and the understanding of the tools.
Right.
Because there's an old adage that says you can screw around in cooking, but baking is a science.
Yeah.
So little tiny things, the temperature being off, the humidity being off, all these things, and you start to realize, wait, these aren't punitive things. These are things telling me I need to pay attention.
Right.
So I try to let that inform the way, to your point about saying about technology, about where it's like, I can have a feeling about it, but it's incumbent upon me and it benefits me if I take a breath and then go, okay, let me do my best to understand what this is
Right.
and where it's coming from and what its possible implementations are, how it could positively impact me and what the negative repercussions could possibly be. And then say, okay, so now if I know that, what is the best way that I can move forward?
Right.
Knowing that. How do I educate myself to the most? Because dismissing it out of hand, I kind of, again, hate to use the sort of reductive kind of thing of, you can't afford that.
Right.
You just can't afford to do that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and on one hand, I find a lot of certainly voice actors who kind of dismiss technology out of hand are simultaneously, a lot of them are like, but they rely entirely on Amazon food delivery, Uber, a lot of technological things that without that, they would suddenly be lost. So it's kind of like, why would you not apply that same diligence to the very thing that is your occupation?
Right. Yeah.
So
absolutely. Well, it also, it's important for people to understand that, okay, the pandemic brought this to your desktop, and okay, you've finally caught up, and you're thinking, all right, well, never going to have to do that again. Yeah, until the next time. And we don't know when the next time will be, but it might just be right around the corner. And it might have to do with something that isn't even technological. It simply means you're going to get knocked off your routine and you're going to have to adapt. And the one thing I was interested in talking to you about is how are actors and performers and singers and musicians, how are we all adapting to the way the technology has been changing and then to the way the pandemic has changed technology? And like my wife Gigi is a musician and she's writing and she's thinking, all right, when I get these songs done, I'd like to maybe put them up on Spotify or get them out on streaming, maybe earn something from them. And then we start looking at the numbers and we realize, unless you're Drake, you're not going to earn anything. Now, it's good to have your material out there so people can discover it. But the way that monetization of your content has changed, the way that algorithms that recommend content and shun other content has changed, and the way it's constantly changing is, to me, that's the new frontier, is understanding platforms and how they allow you or discourage you from practicing your art and reaching an audience and building a community. Because that's what I've been grappling with, is choosing platforms, realizing when one is done with me before I'm done with it.
That's another, wow.
Yeah.
It's funny because each of these are like hour-long conversations.
I know. And here we have like 10 minutes left. And you know why we don't have as much time? Because we had a technical issue at the beginning that I couldn't solve.
We can always do a part two.
Yeah, we may have to do a part two. I tell you what, I'll condense it to a simpler question so you don't have to unpack it all. My experience is I had been putting content up on YouTube, and for a little while it was going okay. I was scaling up, I was monetizing, and then I stepped away from it for a bit. And then at the same time, YouTube's own ecosystem changed, and the algorithm started basically disincentivizing smaller creators by, cutting the amount of money they were making, by cutting the traffic they were making, and incentivizing the larger ones. And I realized, okay, that platform is done with me. I still need it because I can archive material on it and I can send people to it. But the same thing is happening with Twitch. They're taking slightly more than 50% of whatever your subscription money is. And so these are platforms that have exploded, but at the same time, they've decided we're going to algorithmically select for a certain slice of our users to benefit the most. And the rest of you are just going to be, I don't know, you're going to be trying to ice skate uphill. So I've begun to look for newer and better platforms that are just simply more encouraging and incentivizing to me. And that to me is what, if you're, in addition to just auditioning for things, if you're making your own content and trying to build revenue streams with it, you've got to really be up on what is out there. And that's the new challenge.
I would agree. There's, how do I phrase this tightly? There is an inherent duplicity in the purported egalitarianism of these platforms vis-a-vis an individual's ability to generate an income that you have a fair shot at the same starting line.
Right.
It is simply not the case.
No.
I believe, if to use a very kind of quick and dirty metaphor, I believe there is a correlation to it somewhat like you have a store that sells everything, right? Like JCPenney or whatever, you go in, no disrespect to them, but you realize that it's like, over time, when you start going there, they stop carrying the stuff that you want. They got a ton of stuff, but they stop carrying the stuff you want. But in your neighborhood, there's a mom and pop store that carries a lot more of the stuff that you want. So you frequent them. And then you may frequent another store that has some other stuff, again, small independent store. Now, they may not have Apple Pay and face recognition stuff and whatever, and the restock fee or the restock may not be as tight or as timely, but they give you what you want, and there's a connection to that. That is kind of where I see things sort of kind of going, and again, to a larger, arguably, and this is kind of where it does get into a tricky area, where Web3 may be taking things, is where you have a decentralized sort of thing where it's not massive thing, conglomerates choosing these things and algorithmically, putting things at certain levels, because it does, like you said, become an ice skating uphill thing. It's kind of the reason why I always tell people it's good to have an Instagram presence. It's good to have a social media presence. It's good to have all of these things. But you should also always have your own website, so you own your own place that is a landing pad for everything. Because much like we have seen with a bird app that shall remain nameless, is beyond one's control, right? And I will kind of like not hold punches on this one. Is you could have made a living being a smart ass talking slick shit on Twitter all day long, and then because of things completely out of your control, a lot of people and they don't like you. They're like, I'm not dealing with this platform anymore. And then all of a sudden, that's it. And now it's kind of like, well, who is going to take my piquant verbal offerings that I give up daily, right? Like, where do I go to say this?
Where does my pithy commentary go to land?
Right. And then you're like, now where do I get to be a smart ass? And it's kind of like, okay, well, no, it doesn't have the same punch if you're saying, well, a website doesn't do that. That's absolutely correct. But by the same token is vesting all of your eggs into a basket that you don't control, that you have no control over, that could, if the servers just decide to go dead one day, you've lost everything.
Right.
So you have to say, okay, well, like stocks, diversify. Diversify. Have your things among a bunch of different things. A lot of musicians use sites like Bandcamp because Bandcamp allows them to sell directly to people that they want. The profit margin is much higher for them. They develop meaningful connections with them. And in conjunction with things like distribution centers like DistroKid and social media and their own websites, it's like, okay, now that's a lot more doable. It's a lot more, things seem a lot more functional, where we can put things together and we can actually make something that's meaningful.
Yes. But I remember working with, for about a year, I had a guy manage my social media and things like that. And the one real takeaway I had from him, and he's still right about this, is he said, you need a hub that is separate from all these platforms. He said, as big as Twitter is, one day there's going to be something else to supplant it. And as big as YouTube is, and YouTube will probably always be around, but there'll be something else. And I understood where he was coming from. I couldn't fathom how those two things would get knocked off their perches, but I knew that it could happen. And sure enough, this is what we're looking at. And so you need to be able to redirect people, because the overall concept is, I'm an artist, I'm putting forth my ideas into the ether, and I want a community and an audience to discover them. Well, the platform is just one way to do that. Like from my stand-up comedy days and from your touring musician days, you didn't do all of your shows from one stage in one city. You went out on tour. You just had, you let people know, I'm going to be on this stage. Now I'm going to be on this stage. There were different ways to find you. So that's all this is. It is an online virtual tour. And you say, right now you can find me on this app or on this platform, but that may change. So go to my hub. Go to the one place where you know you can always find me. So long as there are servers, there will be chrisedgerly.com or andrewkishino.com or whatever it is you call yours. And you've got to be able to have that, because the one constant will be, you're going to be an artist. You're going to be making product, making content, providing your service. But you have to be able to roll with these changes.
And you have to understand that, for better or for worse, guys, because nobody ever reads the end user license agreement. For better or for worse, when it all goes south, it's like, or somebody ends up using something that you wrote, I mean, you're fighting an uphill battle. It's
right.
Done. By the time you've even started to get in serious about the fight, you've already been taken for everything that that it was. So it's like, well,
yeah.
And sometimes people have this, they confuse the visceral reaction of saying like, well, about getting like an amount of shine or whatever, like the amount of attention they get,
right,
with giving that advice. And it's like, no, I don't care if you show your whole ass on Instagram, or if you're out there saying idiotic crap, inflammatory crap or whatever, or thinking you're funny on Twitter. That doesn't bother me. Like, I don't take that personally if you enter the bragathon breaking your rib, beating your chest. What I look at is say, fine, if that's what you do,
right,
cool. But it's someone else's server, someone else's platform. You're not paying for it. And there was never an implicit understanding that you owned anything you put up there anyway.
Right. Well, I remember people getting angry about Facebook years ago, saying we can do whatever we want with your photos. And people acted as though they were a public utility. I said, guys, you signed an agreement. You uploaded to their server your stuff. Of course they're going to do whatever they want with it, because you agreed to it. You just didn't know that because you didn't read that license agreement is written so that you won't read it. I'm sure it's probably at least a half longer than it needs to be, and that's to discourage you understanding it. And I remember having a cold bucket of water thrown on me when I went to listen to one of the iTunes songs I had loved, and I realized this is a different version. Wait a minute. What just happened? This is a song I'd listened to dozens of times for years, and now I'm hearing a different studio version of it. The vocal sounds different. The instrumentation even sounds a little bit different. And I dug into it and I realized that when you buy a song on Apple, you don't actually own it. You rent access to it. And if they want to switch that song out for a later version, 5 years later, recorded by the same band but in a different studio for whatever reason, that's what you get, and you have no say in the matter. They switched it out. So as soon as you can, download that stuff. Yes, see, nobody can switch out those vinyl albums. And as soon as you can, if you can, download that stuff to your hard drive, keep it. Because if you're just relying on access because you've quote unquote bought it, you don't own it. You are renting access to their digital cache of material. And if they feel like switching it out, they will. And you have no say in the matter.
That's true. That is true, which is a whole other discussion also about ownership versus leasing, because a lot of the stuff from the perceptual standpoint you were talking about 30 years from now is it would never occur to guys like you and me, like, no, I bought the tape. Why would I not buy the tape?
Yeah.
Or buy the record. Now, a lot of people who are much younger than us, like, I don't want to own stuff. I just want to listen to it. And there's a sense of impermanence and transience in that, with the with the nature of things, with art, which again, problematic discussion, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all right. So we'll wrap this up with the caveat that yes, if you want to drill down deeper into this stuff, folks, Andrew and I will just have to talk again about it. But impermanence is probably the watchword here. What we're experiencing as artists is an ever-changing landscape, and it is accelerating the rate of change. And so your art may stay evergreen. The way you express your art may never change, but the way you disseminate it and the way you understand your audience and your community is going to change based on that landscape, based on that technological landscape. And you've got to keep an ear to the ground and an eye open while you're sleeping so that you can adapt and not start shaking your head and wondering where your audience or your community is gone. Because they're still out there, but you have to be able to reach them effectively and take them to an ideal place effectively. And that means vigilance.
You're going to meet somebody at the mall. You can't stand in one place and complain they didn't find you. Sometimes you got to go hunting for them.
Yeah, that's true. I was by Merry-Go-Round for an hour. Merry-Go-Round was a store.
Finding your audience is an active thing. And the one thing I would say also, if there's any musicians listening ever, the one thing I will always say, please, 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 never, ever, ever give up your publishing. No matter what technological stuff we go through, never give up your publishing.
Yeah.
Period. End of sentence. That is the one piece of wisdom that has always held true.
And every major artist will tell you, Anita Baker, an all-time great, finally got her publishing for her albums. And she's in her 60s or 70s. She finally got her publishing. She finally owns her albums now.
Tom Petty signed away the publishing on his first two albums, and for his entire career tried to get them back. And the people who held it knew how valuable it was, and he never, ever, ever got it back. Not
right.
And wherever he is in the ether, bless him.
Yeah.
But he never got that back. He never got it back.
Do it when you're Sting and you can afford to do it for $250 million and say, I don't care about these anymore because I have this. Fine. If someone offers to give you $250 million or whatever the number is for your publishing, fine, take that deal. You'll be okay.
Yeah, I heard somebody say, and it was so awful. Somebody said they commented on a deal like that. It wasn't Sting, but it was somebody else. Yeah. They said, "Oh, gonna run out the clock, huh?"
Yeah, just gonna take a knee.
They were like, you know what? I got how much time left? I'll take $250 million. We're good.
Yeah, exactly. I don't feel like chasing accountants to know if I got paid for this or that stream or this or that usage. You know what? Give me the lump sum. I've got other things to think about. So but for everybody else, hold on to it. Own your shit. Kish, I wish it could have been longer, but you know what? Let's try and do a part 2.
Hey, man, whenever. I'm down for it. And you know what? We did cover a lot of ground.
We did. It just seems like a short amount of time because we usually talk for longer. But
indeed,
I will hopefully see you out in the actual real world soon enough.
Man, definitely. Let's make that happen.
All right. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, big bro.